On this video, I would like to do what I have been doing in previous videos, looking at Christ in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament of the Hebrew Scriptures, seen through New Testament application. We just finished Yeshayahu, or the book of Isaiah. We're now in Lamentations, and we might entitle this, in way of application, how it points to Christ as the weeping final prophet. The book of Lamentations is the lament of Jeremiah over the destruction of Jerusalem. In terms of Christ and its New Testament application, I am reminded of Matthew chapter 23, where Jesus laments over Jerusalem, looking at the coming destruction in 70 AD under the Romans. He says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem," in verse 37, and he begins to weep over the city. How much I would love to have gathered you as a mother hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you would not. Hence your house is left desolate. I shall say to you that you will not see me again until you say, "Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord," in Matthew 23, verses 37 to 39. And so, as Jeremiah weeps over Jerusalem, he is looking at its destruction under the Babylonians, and he becomes, I believe, a type of Christ who weeps preceding the horrific events of 70 AD and the destruction of the Roman temple under the Romans. So I see a typical, application in the antitype of Jesus Christ, seen through New Testament lenses. Now I would like to look at the book of Ezekiel and begin to do a similar study as we did in Isaiah and other books. How does Ezekiel point to Christ if we look at it through New Testament application? Christ, first of all, is the final perfect shepherd. Ezekiel was the prophet who was in Babylon and prophesied to those in the exile concerning the ultimate captivity of Judea. One of Ezekiel's great Christological moments, I believe, is found as a type in chapter 34. This chapter deals with the coming of a good shepherd. The leaders were false shepherds. They did not care for the sheep, Ezekiel says. Ezekiel says unto the shepherds of Israel at that time that they feed themselves, but not the shepherd, not shepherding the sheep. Ezekiel 34, 1-3. One is reminded immediately as we look at the New Testament in John 10, where Jesus refers to the hirelings, those who did not care for the blind man that Jesus had healed. He compares those religious authorities to hirelings, but he then goes on to speak of himself as the true shepherd. They were concerned, Jesus says, about themselves. Ezekiel goes on to drive that point home in his time. You eat the fat and you clothe yourself with wool. You kill the fatlings, but you do not feed the sheep. In Ezekiel 34, verse 3. Jesus, though, goes on to teach that the good shepherd who comes is to take care of the sheep. Ezekiel talks about the shepherd that seeks the flock and goes after them to deliver them. We are told, again in Ezekiel 34, verse 12, seek my sheep. And Jesus then applies that to himself as the good shepherd in John 10:3, when he calls his own sheep by name. We are told in Ezekiel, I will feed my sheep, and I will cause them to lie down. I will seek that which is lost, and I will bring that back that which is driven away. Ezekiel 34, verse 16. Again, I am reminded that the Lord Jesus feeds his sheep and takes them in and out to find pasture. Compare John 10:9. In Luke 15, 1-6, Jesus seeks the sheep which are lost and searches to find them, one lost sheep. So all through these texts, I believe we are seeing the good shepherd found in Jesus Christ, who is caring for the sheep. Furthermore, we have Christ looking at Ezekiel, I believe, as the final David. Ezekiel goes on to talk about how God will set one shepherd over them in chapter 34, verse 23. He says that this shepherd shall feed them, and he will be a shepherd to them. He calls his name David. Again, I am reminded of Jesus as the final David. In Matthew chapter 1, Jesus is the final David if we look at the numerical values for the Hebrew consonant for David, which are 4 plus 6 plus 4, what we might call the Gematria. The number 14 is then found. It's interesting as I look at the New Testament that Matthew speaks of 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the Babylonian captivity, and 14 from the Babylonian captivity to Christ in Matthew 1:17. Jewish readers, I believe, would see the number 14 as pointing clearly to David. And Jesus Christ is the final David then, and Matthew's gospel, I believe, who becomes the shepherd who cares for the sheep. Again, my mind goes to John 10, when Jesus had addressed himself as the good shepherd who gives his life for the sheep, cares for them, and feeds them. It is interesting that we have three statements. We go 14 generations from David to the Babylonian captivity, 1, from the Babylonian captivity to Christ, 2, from Abraham to David, 1, from David to the Babylonian captivity, 2, and from the Babylonian captivity to Christ, 3. In Jewish thinking, you establish a case by three witnesses, and I believe that that is what Matthew is doing. He is establishing that case. And then that Jesus is the final David. Then finally, Christ is the final judge. In Ezekiel, there is, especially in Ezekiel 34, verse 17, a separation of sheep from goats. It's very interesting to me that in Matthew 25, 31-46, depicts Jesus as the final shepherd who will separate the sheep from the goats, which speaks of the final judgment. I'm going to stop there, trying to keep these around 10 minutes if possible. So the next time I will pick up further, study in Ezekiel, looking at the New Testament application, how the New Testament applies the language and the teaching of Ezekiel to Christ.